If we talk about propaganda, boy, the Anglos have been experts in this. And to make a good propaganda campaign, it's necessary to give it a name with a strong word that invokes feelings. So the term captive nations was perfect during the Cold War, a term used by the United States against the image of its opposing ideology, communism. If you've already heard of this term, do you know what the captive nations were according to Washington? Are you interested? Go for it. Then stay until the end of the video. To start, let's see how this not-so-well-known term originated. In 1959, President Dwight Eisenhower was in power. It was in this year that the Committee for Captive Nations was established through Public Law 8690, issued by the United States Congress. This committee named a series of peoples and ethnicities as captive nations, as they were governed by some communist regimes. Through the law, Captive Nations Week was also established in the third week of July to raise public awareness about these peoples who were allegedly under dictatorial governments. Logically, these facts were backed by anti-communist factions in the country, such as the one led by the Ukrainian-descendant economist Lev Dobryansky. Having said that, let's see who the captive nations were. Starting with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as you may know, it was a federation of 15 Soviet Socialist republics, each of which was based on a different ethnicity. For this reason, the United States considered several of these republics as part of the captive nations. Among them, the SSRs of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, probably the most relevant of all. This is because the Baltic countries had already achieved their independence from Russia in 1919, but were re-annexed by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics during the Second World War, an annexation that many Western countries considered illegal and never recognized. Likewise, the SSRs of Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and Ukraine were also considered captive nations as they fought unsuccessfully for their independence during the Russian Civil War. In addition to the above, there were areas within the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic that were also considered captive nations, such as the case of the Idle Ural State, a project to create a country made up of the Turkic peoples of Central Asia, thwarted by the Bolsheviks. We also have the Cossack nation, that is, the liberation of a state based on this warrior lineage that would have detached from the Russian territories adjacent to the Volga. And just as the Soviet government was labeled dictatorial, the government of several of the Warsaw Pact countries, considered allies or satellite states of the Kremlin, met a similar fate. For this reason, countries such as Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, East Germany, Bulgaria, and Albania were also on the list of captive nations, as they were countries that lacked democratic elections for several decades. But let's remember that the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was not the only communist power, so Mao Zedong's China also received criticism from the US government. In this case, all of mainland China was declared a captive nation, as it was a territory claimed by the Kuomintang government centered in Taiwan, which at that time was considered the true China in the face of the United Nations. Likewise, Tibet also had this denomination, since at the beginning of the 20th century it had proclaimed itself an independent kingdom, which was only annexed by the Chinese Communist Party in 1951 after the end of the Chinese Civil War. A similar fate befell the Uighurs of the Turkestan region, who proclaimed a fleeting independence, but were finally annexed by China in 1949. And in addition to the territories already mentioned, other countries under communist and anti-democratic governments were also included in the list of captive nations, among them North Vietnam, which had not yet completed its unification with the capitalist South, and North Korea, which shared a similar fate and remained separate from the southern part since the end of the Korean War. That is, in these two cases, the denomination did include political and military support from the United States, so the captive nations did form a certain precedent for effective interventions. So as you can see, the Cold War also had a strong propagandistic component, which could have contributed to concrete political and military interventions, at least from the Western and capitalist side, as we have seen in this video. So now I would like to know your opinion. Do you think the title of captive nations suited all these countries? Do you think it was a good way to do propaganda? Don't forget to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel. Also, I leave in the description my social networks, and in case you want to see the new videos in pre-release and have a greater interaction with me, your donations on Patreon, unamanito.net, or channel members are welcome. See you next time.